Happy Friday and welcome back everybody to another episode of Get Weird with me, your host, the crazy lady herself, Brittany Barbieri. I hope everybody had an incredible Easter. I know I was busy, but I was able to fly back from work in time to spend a beautiful and blessed Easter Sunday with my family. My husband and my stepson threw out 120 eggs across the yard for our two littles, now 9 and 5. Good Lord, where's the time gone? To run all over finding these hidden Easter eggs, which I'm sure there might be still some left in the yard, so you're welcome, insects. Anyway, on this week's episode, we dive into the strange and weird history of the moon-eyed people. Now, are they a forgotten race or perhaps a misunderstood part of our history? Who knows? But as always, let's dive in, shall we? Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, long before European settlers even arrived, the Cherokee told of a strange people who only came out at night. Their skin was pale, they had glowing eyes, and they were blinded by the sunlight. These individuals were called the moon-eyed people. Bum, bum, bum. I know it sounds so crazy, right? But this is true. We're diving into original Cherokee accounts. So the first legend of the moon-eyed people comes from the oral traditions of the Cherokee Nation, one of the most historically enriched indigenous cultures in North America. Now, according to their accounts, the moon-eyed people live in the Appalachian Mountains, and they were there before the Cherokee even arrived. Now, it is written that they were described as being small in stature, pale or white-skinned, which would make sense if they never see sunlight, sometimes bearded, so they do grow some facial hair, good for them. Their defining trait, well, they could not see in daylight. The sunlight or any kind of light hurt their eyes. Now, this would make sense if they were nocturnal. So because of this, they lived in caves or underground spaces. They were said to be nocturnal, just as I said, only emerging at night, and their eyes were said to be adapted to that of the moonlight. Now, when the Cherokees encountered them, war broke out, and the moon-eyed people were driven out or possibly disappeared entirely. We are not completely sure, as that part of the history is a little muddy. Now, a very important piece of this comes from the Fort Mountain mystery. Now, one of the biggest physical anchors to this legend is the Fort Mountain in Georgia, a massive stone wall stretching about 850 feet. Now, the origin of this wall is said to be completely unknown, and some Cherokee traditions say the moon-eyed people actually built it. Now, even early American accounts from the 1700s mention locals being told that a strange race that existed before the Cherokee and vanished mysteriously were involved. I don't know if any of that is true, but this is what the legends tell us, and I find it fascinating. There's so much to it that we just don't understand. There is early written history. Now, for my friends that love to have some receipts, this is where it gets interesting, and you can look this up for yourself. In 1797, naturalist Benjamin Smith Barton recorded the story, and he even wrote that the Cherokee described a people who could not see in the daylight. Other early figures like frontier leader John Sevier also reference similar stories and cases. Now, for me, this wasn't just modern folklore, which I don't like that word. And if you Google or want to look up or research the history and the terminology of who created the word folklore and how and why it was created, I think then you'll understand why I'm kind of like, I don't like this word. That's just I know it's used in a lot of documentation about historical events that come from more Indigenous talking about stories or legends from their people. And I just feel that the word folklore is kind of insulting. I don't know. Research it yourself, and then you guys can tell me what you think. But personally, I think it's kind of insulting when we're talking about Indigenous or Native Americans or what have you, or natives to any island or land, and we label it as, oh, their stories are just folklore. Folk basically meaning it's not true. This is all just folklore. This is their stories. So folk being them and lore being the fake or embellished story that they're telling. And I just don't really like the terminology personally. That's just me personally. I feel that these are more oral stories or historical stories for them and their people. And it is not for me to say if it's real or isn't real, because to be quite frank, I didn't live 200 years ago when all this was being talked about, documented, and passed down through oral history of their elders. And so for me, I can't say it did or didn't. I think it's actually very egotistical of me to come out and say, oh, this isn't real. The Moon-eyed people don't exist. We have no flipping clue what existed, what still exists, and what's covered up today. So for us to sit here and say it didn't, it's very egotistical. And frankly, I'm just going to be honest with you. You don't know garbage. You don't know. And we learn every day about forgotten or hidden history or things that were removed on purpose because they didn't want us learning about it, and things that are covered up all the time that are resurfacing now that we're like, oh my gosh, why didn't we know about this? How come we didn't know? This is incredible. This is amazing history. And I just feel sometimes we really get ahead of ourselves, and we really, because it may seem so crazy to your mind, it doesn't mean it's not real or possible or plausible. Sometimes I think a lot of us are driven to be so matter of fact and so black and white that we have lost the childhood wonderment and excitement of discovery and the possibility of something truly groundbreaking and incredible. And I know that those individuals exist. I've had so many conversations with so many open-minded scientists, and I applaud them and I thank them for staying grounded in the possibility that we have not discovered or know anything about anything. And I love that aspect. And I think in science, it's so important, whether you're in the lab or in the field, that we don't butt heads, that we do keep an open mind, that even though it might sound so outlandish, does not mean that it is not true. And I think it's important that, yes, I understand that we have to have so much base within science, but science can't always explain everything. And that is why we theorize and we evolve with whatever we discover next. And it can rewrite our history. It can rewrite timelines. It can rewrite everything. And this happens all the time. And I talk to scientists that are actually out in the field biologists and field researchers and field scientists who are actually in the dirt for months on end, finding things and discovering species or things that we didn't think possible. And their fight is always going back to those above them and saying, this is what I discovered in the field. I'm seeing this, or I'm hearing about this, and I want to dive deeper. And they're not getting the funding to do so because the ones above are saying, that's not real. It doesn't exist. Well, let me tell you, folks, this is like common practice, and this has happened throughout history, and you can go all the way back even to the freaking platypus that was sitting on someone's desk, an actual carcass, and they still believed until they cut it open that it was a well-fabricated hoax, that all of these different pieces and parts were sewn together, until they actually dove into it and learned that everything we thought we knew about species and how everything evolves and works was thrown out the window that day when they dove into the platypus, and so on and so forth. And so even the gorillas, if you want to actually dive into species alone through zoological science of things that have been discovered far into the periods of the 1950s and 60s that were said to not exist, but hey, guess what? They freaking do. Please, by all means, go for it, because you are going to be surprised at what you uncover. So when I hear these legends and these stories from 200 years ago about a possible or plausible race of human or bipedal, whatever, on our planet coexisting, maybe before some of the other species evolved, folks, I don't rule it out. And I can't say that a line or a lineage of even the human ancestral tree at certain times during certain major events on our planet didn't make some of us, depending on where we were and why, head underground for safety and for survival. So I can't say that some didn't evolve to nocturnal living because they had and were forced to live in the dark of cave systems and tunnel systems of cave systems underground and traveled through that. Now, we know there are thousands upon thousands of cave systems just in North America alone that still have not been properly surveyed or properly walked or mapped. Nothing. They're just sitting there waiting to thoroughly be investigated. So we really can't say one iota about this being real or not real and that everything about it is just malarkey. I'm sorry. I don't believe that at all. And our indigenous cultures and our natives to this land and to these countries, man, they survived so much and they wrote about what they saw and they experienced for those after. That's why it became oral history of their people, what they encountered, the seasons, the food, the animals, etc. So that those coming to their land, or if they had to move on, knew, okay, at this part in this territory, these were the seasons. This is when we could harvest the best crops. This is when this is the animals we came against. These are the preys and the predators we came up against. So you can't just rule it out that, what, I'm sorry, I'm not going to tell the indigenous that they don't know what they're talking about. Like, what? That's so egotistical. Anyway, I know I digress, but the word folklore, because that is what this is written as. If you research it, it just bothers me. I don't like it and I find it insulting. So even though that is the verbiage that is written within the research of the moon-eyed people, I would like to call it the legend and stories, the indigenous stories of the Cherokee people and the native stories of the native people that were documented 200 years ago. So let's move past this. Okay, let me get my brain back around it. So what were these people really? Okay, so there are some major theories out there. One of them is that it's a real ancient tribe, which I could totally agree with. Some believing that they were even possibly pre-Cherokee population. Some even believe that they may have had some rare skin or genetic condition that was like light sensitivity. They could have even been albinos, or and that's something that we can't rule out. This would explain the pale skin, the night activity, and of course the moon-eyed vision effect. You would have to understand that if you've ever looked into an animal that has nocturnal eyes, it's going to look a little bit different than ours and how it functions and how it looks. And now again, if they've completely evolved to just nighttime only, hell, pardon my French, we don't even know honestly how their eyes would look. We can assume through science what it would look like if someone's eyes adapted to only nocturnal living. So with that in mind, folks, it could look very weird. These people could look very, very weird. And I think if you guys could remember, there was a period of time in the 90s where people were starting to document deep in jungles and in mountain terrains and regions of these almost white looking beings, and people were calling them, are they fallen angels, because their eyes were so hollowed out and dark and they were only seen at night. And when flashlights would hit them, they would said to scream and like run and scurry quickly, but their skin was pale, like super duper pale. There was a famous video that circled online for quite some time. And they were like, is it a fallen angel? Oh, we found feathers. I mean, granted, I don't think that's the case. It could have been a person or a being that was one of these nocturnal moon-eyed people that still existed and was out hunting at night above ground, it's looking, and it could have just been a bird that it took down. Anyway, so there are those legends and lores of these white people, and we can't rule out, when those cases have popped up over the years and they're seen only at night, could this be a sighting of that of what the ancients have talked about as the moon-eyed people? Well, we can't rule it out, right? There's also, this is where it gets a little controversial, I will say. So the Welsh explorer theory. Okay. So some claim that they were linked to the legend of Prince Madoc, a Welsh explorer who supposedly came to America before Columbus. That's where it gets controversial. I'm just telling you some of the research. I have the notes here. It was documented that they were pale-skinned, blue eyes, equaling, I'm sorry, not equaling, but presenting as European looking. Okay. So this theory was popular with early settlers of this being the case, but modern historians often push back on this topic quite a lot. Understandably so. It's heavily controversial because Columbus. We can go into the colonial rewriting and the propaganda of it all. Some researchers even believe in this, right? The story was twisted by Europeans to suggest that white people were the first here. Again, controversial, I know, but I have to present everything to you on this case because you have to kind of understand where everybody and everything was coming from. So this actually was used to, what they claim, undermine Indigenous history and take claim ancient structures weren't built by Native Americans, which I think is extremely insulting. Because let's face it, that's not the case at all. We have so much documentation of explorers that came and touched the grounds of the North Americas and literally came in contact with many different native tribes. So I really think that that's pretty kind of twisted. I would agree. As a rewrite of propaganda, I really don't like that. I think we should just stick with it, what I believe it truly is, which is true oral history and legend from the natives living here and what they've encountered living amongst this land prior to anybody coming here. Well, could this be something else? Like, we cannot rule out that this could be something else entirely, right? Maybe not even human. Okay. And I know people are like, whoa, now we're getting weird. Well, welcome to the Weird Podcast. That's why we're here. We're talking about nocturnal, underground, light sensitive beings that disappear without a trace. Now, does this sound familiar to you? Now, this is where cryptozoology and paranormal theories can come in, where we can present subterranean hominoids, or ancient other species. We can't rule that out. And even I am sure that there are some supernatural theorists or paranormal theorists that would even jump in and throw in the possibility, even ufologists most likely, within another core part of my research and field research, is interdimensional interpretations of beings from somewhere else entirely. I can't rule that out because when we look at cases that pop up across the globe, this is not just one isolated case, folks. I'm going to present to you similar legends around the world pertaining to this particular case. But let's go back to episodes where I talked about the Green Children of Woolpit. They originally said they came from St. Martin's Land, a subterranean land, which they had strange skin pigmentation, could not eat the foods we eat. So again, these interdimensional slips of time and space are another plausibility of things that we do not understand when science has already confirmed that there are about 5 or I think 6 different dimensions coexisting at the same timeline as ours. And if you don't believe me, you can look that up. That is actual scientific research that is out and published in scientific journals for your enjoy of reading. Please, by all means, go take a look. Go take a look-see, because I love reading scientific journals and thesis and different documentation from different scientists that have written these incredible theories and papers that get published within the colleges or universities or what have you. And you can actually go and read these theories. And I have to admit, it makes me very sad that some of these theories are not more public to wrap people's brains around. It's almost as if they're purposely pushed down, just like the stories of giants, just purposely shoved down. Why? Why cover up the history of giants or people that were gigantic in nature? I find it compelling and fascinating. Why is it so hard for us to wrap our brains around the possibility of other things that took place on this planet than something so simple? And you can't throw God in the mix. I hate when people throw that in. Well, if aliens are real, then we can't talk about God. Why? Because if you do believe in God, well, by all means, then God would create all of these things. If you believe in a creator at all of anything, whether it's the creator through evolution or creation, well, no matter what side of the table you sit on, the universe was still created. And we have no idea what else was created on this entire sphere that we're sitting on that's just we're not floating rock, people, in space. Let that sink in. Within a galaxy of a galaxy of a galaxy of a galaxy of galaxies. I mean, we're infinite in space upon just worlds and worlds beyond ours. And we live in this little tiny little mindset that what you see is what you get. Everything's so black and white. There's just a Hobby Lobby. There couldn't possibly be a Michaels or Joanne Fabrics that also offers you the same types of goodies. Nope. It's just a Hobby Lobby. So I think it's very small-minded of us as a race, as individuals, to close ourselves off, to to not push ourselves past the understanding. Don't just read things because it's easier on you to be like, oh, this is just too hard to read. No, push yourself, really level yourself in the way that you see things and you hear things, because this is where we expand as a race. I feel, and I'm probably going to get a lot of slack for this one, but I feel as a race we have de-evolved. We should be evolving constantly, and I feel as though we are de-evolving every time we don't dig further into the past to better understand our future. And I know that not everybody's going to agree with me on that, but that is how I see. I don't live in a world that's black and white. I see a lot of gray and colors and full spectrum, right? I don't just see the basic colors of the rainbow. I see full spectrum. And I think that all of us should see full spectrum so that we're better equipped of understanding the supernaturals and the levels around us that surround us throughout history and these stories that have been told and passed down. We should not turn our face away from them and laugh and say it's not real when we really do not know if it is or isn't real. So I want to connect some dots here for us with similar legends around the world. And of course, you know me, when I hear about the moon-eyed people, it's not so unique to me, to be honest. So in Panama, they have a type of moon-eyed tribe. Lionel Wafer, I believe his name was, as an explorer, described in Panama of people being called the moon-eyed people. They could see better at night than during the day. The daytime was very hard for them. They were almost nocturnal themselves. And to me, this case in particular is nearly almost identical in the description. In Ireland, I don't want to even try and say it properly in Gaelic because I know that I will mess it up. But you can look it up in Ireland. They are now known as the fairy folk. But prior to being known as the fairy folk, they had a very detailed Gaelic name. And they were also known as pale, mythical beings. They lived in underground dwellings and connected to light sensitivity and otherworldly traits, just like that of the moon-eyed people. Norse mythology also has what's called the dark elves. They lived underground, avoiding sunlight, had strange vision and abilities. In the Appalachia, they were known as the little people legend. Across Native American traditions, okay, we have Cherokee. And again, I don't want to mispronounce the Cherokee name for little people, so I will just leave that there. You guys can look it up and do it in translations if you'd like. Other tribes did describe small hidden beings living in caves or mountains, and again, these could possibly overlap and evolve into the same story or have evolution into the same storyline of these creatures. But again, that is more. The albino spirit legends, these go across different cultures and multiple indigenous cultures, honestly, across the globe, about albino individuals that were seen as spirit touched, in quotations, and connected to night or moon energy, which again, extremely fascinating to me. So we're not talking about just this, legend in the Cherokee lore. No, folks, we are talking about, and how that's written is Cherokee lore, okay? If you research this or look this up. No, we are talking about oral history. I would like to make that correction right now on my podcast to honor that of the indigenous people and our natives to this land. This was a part of their oral history, and I respect that history. I respect their oral history, their culture, and the stories that they passed down so that we could be educated, so that we could understand what was going on this freaking land prior to anybody coming and evolving on this land. So I think we need to pay attention to that oral history and not poo-poo it away as the quote unquote, how rudely and egotistical it is called, as folklore. I cannot stand that. It is, and maybe it's because I come from Irish descent. I have a lot of Celtic blood in me. And as you know, the Irish, we have a lot of true oral history and culture and stories and legends from our land and from our country. And I am very proud of that. I also have very deep Celtic Viking blood in me. And there's so much from our history that I feel is just completely overlooked or not talked about enough. And I will always honor our cultures, our differences, our indigenous, our natives, and the true core oral history of every single race. And I will not poo-poo that away as some kind of fairy tale folklore just because my mind is not capable to or largely capable or even intelligent enough to understand half of these stories because of just being closed off, being told to close it off, that it's not real. And I don't agree with that. So the big question is, what are we looking at when we look at the Moon-Eyed people? Okay. What are we really looking at? Is it a lost human population? Perhaps. A misunderstood genetic group of people? Also very plausible. A story of altered history by colonization? I don't believe that whatsoever. That's me personally. I'm not telling you what to believe, but I don't personally believe in the altered history theory. Or are we dealing with something completely different and it's not fully human? It's something that evolved over time. For all we know, folks, I'm going to throw out another fun theory. It's a type of Sasquatch that has no hair and lives underground and in caves. You're welcome. There's been plenty of strange movies out there that we could literally dive into that could fall into line with this. And I know you know what I'm talking about. And plenty of movies have, and I wish I could think of the name at the time, but there was one where they dove into the caves and they came in contact with just these kind of creatures, the Moon-Eyed people, these weird pale beings that lived in these cave systems. Anyway, when we strip it all down, folks, the pattern continues to repeat itself through different cultures and different indigenous tales, and the same pattern continues. It is pale beings, underground or hidden from plain sight, night adapted beings who merely live in complete darkness because the sunlight hurts them. So they have to live in caves, they have to live underground, and they have been driven out by anyone above ground, or have they vanished completely? Now, I don't believe that they vanished completely, if you ask me. I just don't think we give them enough credit, right? So if we want to play the devil's advocate and say, if they are real and they do exist, I believe that they have evolved enough in mental capacity to understand that, hey, these people are bad and we've got to stay hidden from them. The same as we know about different cultures with the Yeti or the Yeren in Southeast Asia, right? We know that they have come in contact with these beings, but they also know they are harmless if you leave them alone. And that is what we do. We respect them and we leave them alone. We know that they're up at this peak. We know that they're in this part of the forest region and we don't mess with them and they don't mess with us. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't observe each other, but we, observe each other with a respect of space. And so with this in mind, it is very possible that when you hear these really scary or weird stories coming out of the Appalachian Mountains, my God, folks, it is very possible that some of those could be very true because these are beings that have been driven out by society to remain hidden in the darkness and live completely in the dark, away from civilization and merely living by the shed of moonlight to travel by or underground because they have adapted to nocturnal living so that their eyesight can see extremely well at night. And in fact, for those of you that don't believe in the science of this and that it can be possible for anybody, it's interesting to note that in zoological studies that something we saw unfold during 2020 when everyone was isolated and contained in their homes, that certain animals were learning to hunt at certain times. And then when humans came back out, it actually drove certain species to hunt at night to avoid running into any humans. And we noticed a pattern through certain animals that were actually daytime hunters that turned nocturnal hunters. And their eyesight actually grew stronger at a faster evolutionary speed than what we had seen or what we thought we knew how long it would take for eyes to adapt to more of a nocturnal hunting. Okay. So we need to understand that this isn't something that might take millions of years, as some scientists like to throw out these crazy, ridiculous numbers in their theories. No, this is something that we saw happen in the span of just a few years of animals learning to adapt to nocturnal hunting. So again, we would have to assume that maybe it doesn't take millions or thousands of years. It could take just maybe a decade less to have animals or beings adapt to a nighttime hunting, a nighttime visionary skill of adaptation. Again, things we have to consider, things we have to look at. You have to look at all spectrum of races of human species, animal species, and everything. So really, the next time you're deep in the mountains and the sun drops behind the trees, I want you to remember, some legends do say they didn't disappear. They just went where the light cannot follow. Until next time, my friends, stay weird.